4 months after retiring, I found myself sobbing with overwhelming gratitude at a remote cabin in the woods. I just had an epic realization that was gonna ask me to come back for one more Olympics. The realization was this: there was an astounding physiological feedback loop between our emotional state, our cognitive function, and our physical capacity. And we can actually tap into the power of emotions to affect the first two, but we often don't when we're athletes. I'm gonna use this remote over here. This is me a couple years ago. Javelin's a really interesting sport in that it's about doing one movement to perfection. But it's also cool because it makes you incredibly sensitive to anything that changes your body. I understand what made me focused, or what could improve my capacity to perform on demand. The thing was, although I'm very tall and strong, I've always been a little uncoordinated and known as somewhat of a klutz. And it was kind of challenging when you're doing something as explosive as javelin. When I went to UBC to study kinesiology, I became fascinated by all the ways I could change my body using physical training and mental training. I became obsessed with high-performance habits. I would read outside of class, and I continued to study this well into my professional career. And when I used it to make my first Olympics, I threw everything that I knew at making that games. And not only did I break the Canadian record and make the Olympics, I even made the Olympic final. One thing that made it really easy to choose what habits to take on and what to do was understanding Pareto's law. It's a mathematical principle that says 20% of the work can get you 80% of the results. And this made it really easy to actually move forward and select what was actually going to help me. So at this point, I thought emotions were kind of a low priority when I was thinking about return on investment via Pareto's law. And eventually, when I did have some emotional problems a couple of years later, I went and saw a sports psych, and they were really helpful for that specific thing that I was going through. But I knew I needed to be proactive, so I started going in through the mind to affect my body by using meditation. I'd also go through the body by trying to make sure my sleep was good, or doing ice baths to make sure I was getting enough dopamine to regulate my emotional levels. But what I didn't realize was that emotions are incredibly powerful, and they can affect the way we think and then we move within minutes. And that gratitude has the highest return on investment out of so many emotions. So back to the cabin and why I was crying. I had just gone on this input diet because I'd retired and I needed to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And I figured the less information I had coming at me, the more I could create. So I stopped watching TV, reading books, listening to podcasts. I saw very few people, and I had a simple diet, and I did the same yoga poses every day, no more dynamic training. And this allowed me to dive in and start writing a book about high-performance habits, because I wanted to help the next generation of athletes so that they didn't have to try and find all the things to make them just a little bit better. I could give them a bit more of a strategy. So I've been writing for 2 days at this cabin for this change of scene. It was going great. And to wind down for the night, I normally do a gratitude practice. But instead of writing it this evening, because I was kind of tired of writing at this point, I thought I'd do a gratitude meditation. So I sat in it, and I thought, wait a second, what's the definition of gratitude? It's like thankfulness or appreciation. I was like, no, that's not it. Those are synonyms. I thought, how could I possibly induce an emotion if I don't know what it is? So I went to Google. There's lots of definitions of gratitude, but this is the one that I really like. It's the feeling of receiving a gift from nature, the universe, God, or another living entity. The feeling of receiving a gift means that it is not we don't deserve it. It's not owed to us. It is given freely. And we can't actually experience that gift if we don't feel that way about it. So I thought about my health and how I had been injured so many times in my career. And whenever I actually was healthy, I wasn't grateful for it. I felt like I deserved it. I felt like it was owed to me for how much time, energy, and money I'd spent on just trying to feel healthy. But in that moment, I thought about how great my coaches were to help me stay healthy, how epic my physios were to get me back from so many injuries, and how lucky I was to come out of the sport healthier at 34 than I was at 24. And I actually sat in the emotion for a moment. So there's a speaking principle that says that when you say something important to your audience, you should pause. Why? So that they can absorb it not only cognitively, but emotionally. We need to do the same thing for ourselves in gratitude practices. If we're practicing too fast, then we can't actually experience the thing that we're trying to experience. So I actually sat into gratitude with the definition, and I paused and I dropped into it. And this warmth started to flood my chest, and my shoulders started to roll back. I thought, oh, that's interesting, that's nice. And then I started to smile. And then I felt kind of self-conscious, and I was like, don't smile, be serious, you're doing something. I was like, this is dumb, I'm in the woods by myself. And I thought, wait a second, I need to smile. Smiling is so important. It's a part of this feedback loop, because when we're happy, we smile. And facial feedback hypothesis says we can smile to make ourselves happy. It goes both ways. It's the same thing if you've heard about power poses, standing confidently for a couple of minutes to boost your levels of confidence. This loop goes both ways, and it's really important to fully experiencing an emotion. If we shut down our physical response to the nervous system input coming from our brain about what's going on, then we blunt the effect. So I smiled. And the warmth flooded my chest even more, and my shoulders rolled back even more. And I got this big nervous system rush up my face, down my spinal cord, into my heart, and went whoomp. I thought, well, this is interesting. So the next thing I thought about was the emotional scale. All these things were just popping into my mind, which was kind of interesting. And I remember thinking, this is the most physically grateful I've ever felt. And the emotional scale is cool because it organizes emotions into positive emotions and negative emotions. And it goes from the middle, where they're less intense, to the outsides, where they're very intense. And the emotional scale is useful because it reminds us that it's really hard to jump emotional states, like being sad and someone's like, just smile, be happy. And you're like, and it feels really disingenuous. On the other hand, the scale shows us that if we're incredibly angry, it's actually easier to move into disappointment because it's only a little bit higher, but it's still allowing us to climb the scale. I remember I read a couple minutes earlier that gratitude is one of the most reachable emotions, but it also helps us climb this scale because all it involves is recognizing the gifts, the beautiful things, the things that are wonderful in our life or outside of our life that have nothing to do with us deserving it, like the beautiful nature around us, or I love dogs. Just thinking about dogs makes me grateful that they exist in the world, and it instantly brings me up. So in this state, in this high level of gratitude, I thought, I feel like the next most reachable emotion is love. But I hadn't allowed myself to experience it in years. I'd been totally heartbroken, and I just didn't even want to think about it. But in this moment, feeling so much gratitude, I thought, that feels reasonable. And I thought about how grateful I was for my ex, even though we'd broken up and I was heartbroken at some point. And I thought about track and how grateful I was for all my experiences in track, even though it hadn't gone the way I thought it would. And I was so happy because I love myself so much, even though it hadn't. And that's when it happened. The moment where I started crying, because I experienced this huge flood where the warmth from my chest went through my entire body. And I felt like my heart exploded and my mind expanded simultaneously. My shoulders and my chest were cracking and popping. And every thought I felt like I'd ever had, every experience I'd ever had, anything I'd ever learned, was in this big connected web. And I saw it all in one flash. And I thought, oh my God, I know what I missed. This was also the most amount of love I'd ever felt in my life. And I'd induced it by myself, which is a really cool thing. Now, I recognize that this is probably not how most gratitude experiences go. I think it's because of my input diet and because I was in this state where I was perpetually thinking about all these things, and it just allowed me to step in this space. But this was the epiphany. I realized that I've been so frustrated with track and field, trying so hard, yet I hadn't had a personal best in 9 years. I was sad about some different things, and I had trapped myself in the postures, in the mindset, and the emotional states relative to them. And I was not able to move cleanly, and I wasn't able to produce actual clean power. So, as I said, I've been doing yoga for 4 months straight, same poses every single day. And since my posture felt so open, I thought, I'm gonna test this, because I feel different. So I took my foot, put it on my hip, and I reached behind my back. And I can get maybe an inch or two away from my foot. But today, I reached behind and I palmed the whole thing. And I thought, that's another 6 inches of mobility in my shoulder from inducing an emotional state. What would that do to a javelin throw? So I figured if I could find a way to live and train in high-level emotions, it would change the way I think, it would make me more effective, and it would change the way I moved. And since our posture affects our emotion, which affects our coordination, which affects our power production, that should work pretty good for me. On the cognitive side, high-level emotions and low-level emotions affect our brain very differently. We're in a low-level emotion like we're seeing red or we're so angry, our sight's narrow. We get into survival mode and we can only see the things in that exact moment that help us survive. It makes it really hard to see anything outside of that, even if it would be something that helped us. On the flip side, high-level emotions allow us to relax, to be open. We feel safe, and it increases our capacity for creativity. There's something called the broaden and build theory, which states that positive emotions allow us to have more information at our disposal because we're feeling more relaxed. It allows us to be more creative, and on top of that, it allows us to come up with novel problem-solving solutions, and from this place, be inspired to take braver action. The big picture is this. We have a lot of capacity to not control our emotions, but use emotions to induce effects in the mind and in the body. The body and the mind, in turn, feed back into these emotional states. If we can consistently maintain higher level emotions more frequently, then we will groove in patterns of behaviors, of movement, of the way we think, and we'll operate from this place more frequently, and it becomes easier to move towards what we want. On top of this, gratitude is the easiest emotion to induce and allows us to actually step into this upward spiral. But the question is, can gratitude satisfy the 80-20 rule, Pareto's law, for emotional training? I think it can, especially when we combine it with play. There's lots of evidence showing that we learn way faster in play than we do in work. Some numbers saying 20 to 40 times faster. So I decided to gamify gratitude, and I call it the game of the gifts. I now do this on top of my regular gratitude practice that has been a little bit updated. And the point is, it allows you to top up during the day so that it makes it easier to stay in these states. The outcome of this is that it rewires our brain to perceive the world through the lens of gratitude. So, level 1 of the game of the gifts is about noticing the gifts, the good luck, the connections, the opportunities, and the coincidences for the things that you want to see move forward in your life. The other part of that game is noticing the gifts you give yourselves, the choices you make, the contributions that you make to moving your life forward, no matter how small. Those are important too. And what I started to do was I write it down on a calendar, a big month-long calendar, and I write down the gifts that I'd experienced that day. And then I started to notice that these gifts were adding up, that there was more and more every day, and that's when I knew I had shifted the way I thought, because I was seeing more. I had made myself sensitive. Now, obviously, we can be experiencing wonderful things, doing this upward spiral, and then something can knock us out, some event that makes us feel negative emotions, and we can start to experience a downward spiral. But gratitude is actually incredibly useful because it's more than just seeing gifts. It is a problem-solving lens for how we deal with negative emotions. So negative emotions aren't necessarily bad things. It's just that they're better places to visit and very useful places to visit, but they're not great to live in. Negative emotions show us what we don't want, which actually allows us to then figure out what we do want, and they catalyze us to actually take action. In that, most negative emotions are actually a gift. This quote was on my wall for years before I started playing the game of the gifts, and I think it actually inspired it. The universe gives you what you need, not what you think you want, because we're not omniscient. And I love this because I started noticing that every challenge, every heartbreak, every betrayal that I'd been through, if I actually sat in it long enough, there was a gift to be learned that made my life infinitely better once I learned that lesson. So negative emotions are useful to visit because, again, they indirectly show us what they want. I just want to preface this by saying this is not to say that this could solve all mental health or that the worst traumas in the world could be solved with just a little bit of gratitude. This game is about equipping ourselves with tools to move through life with more ease, more joy, and more grace. So what we're doing with this is that we are stopping the feedback loop at multiple points. 1, you experience something, you feel an emotion. Apparently emotions are experienced physiologically for 90 seconds. Beyond that, we propagate it within ourselves within this spiral. Noticing it and deciding to play the game is a first step in interrupting it at the mental point. The next part, shake out the body. Get it out of your posture, get it out of your nervous system, just reset your system a little bit. Now we've interrupted it at the point of the body. Now we go to the source, emotions, and we say, what emotion am I experiencing? When we ask this question, sometimes it can be hard to name them. Our emotional literacy is not great as a society, apparently, and there are so many emotions to go through. So I highly recommend Googling emotional wheel. I do it all the time. We look at it, find an emotion that you feel like is one you're probably experiencing, and then look up its definition. It is only in their depth and understanding them a little bit more that we actually know if they apply to us and if it's useful to understand it. Then, look at the opposite side of the wheel. These are the emotions that are the ones you'd probably rather be experiencing. And if you start looking through them, you'll find some that might be how you'd actually rather experience the situation. The step after this is to ask, how could I act differently? How could I behave differently in order to increase the likelihood of experiencing this positive emotion in the future? And then you sit in it once you have a solution and you marinate in it, just like with gratitude. Because the point is that now you're starting to see options in the future and you're giving yourself ideas on how to take action. This stops us from spiraling down, and instead we find our way out of a downward spiral and come up with a solution and start finding different ways to enjoy our life. It gives us agency to move forward. Level 2 is obviously a little bit harder, but if we take our time to actually sit in these emotions, we'll realize there's only 1 or 2 that are consistently bugging us, and just figuring out one can make a huge difference. For me, I was constantly frustrated, but when I looked at the opposite side of the emotional wheel, the word I loved was triumphant, the feeling of overcoming a challenge. So now, whenever I'm getting stressed out and I feel frustrated, the first thing I say is, how could this be? How could I actually understand this in order to master it? And it makes me excited because it lets me know that I'm on epic adventure and I'm going to the next level. Thank you.